A Complete Unknown isn't just a Bob Dylan movie. It's also shined a spotlight on the work of Joan Baez. She wound down her music career in 2018 but has continued as an activist and artist. Here's what you may not have known about this legendary musician. Joan Baez released her Spanish-language album in 1974 and has said that she was never a fluent speaker, even though her father spoke it at home. Perhaps she never picked it up in full because her family traveled often, and other languages were always around her too. Albert Baez had degrees in physics and math from Drew, Syracuse, and Stanford universities. While he was at Stanford, he and his research partner started studying the possibility of using mirrors to focus X-rays in a way that would allow for the microscopic study of living cells. The tech he put forward in the thesis for his PhD is still in use today in sciences from medicine to astronomy. Post-college, Albert and his family traveled all over the world for his work developing educational programs. They lived in Paris, Iraq, and Boston, and for years, Albert focused on education in developing nations.
We're going to take off for Calcutta, visiting the different departments of science.
He wrote of his core beliefs. Science is one of the things needed in these countries if you're going to have a base for a future economy. Otherwise, they'll always be the servants of the United States. Joan Baez has deeply personal reasons for lending her voice to movements for equality and peace. She explained to Time in 1962 that when her family was living in a suburb of Buffalo, New York, they discovered they had a neighbor who used racial slurs to describe them. When they moved to California, things got even worse. Joan found her school divided into strictly segregated groups. It had a deep impact on her. She made it clear that she didn't want to grow up in a world like the one that she saw forced upon her. The now-dated Time piece about Baez shows how far things still needed to go. The writer describes her long almond face, semi-oriental clothing choices, and her voice as being reminiscent of, quote, black women wailing in the night. When Joan Baez spoke with the Washington Post in 2021 about her decision to retire, she shared that she always saw her unique voice as a gift that she didn't have a role in creating. Baez added, "If I view it that way, then I can appreciate it and talk about it for what it is, not something I created. It helps me stay grateful." But even with her gift, Baez didn't assume that she'd have a career in music. She told The Telegraph that although she'd gotten her start playing in small coffee houses, she wasn't prepared for Bob Gibson bringing her up on stage for one of his concerts. Baez said, "It looked like the largest gathering of people on earth. I felt as if I'd been invited to my own execution." At that point, she hadn't been considering music as a serious pursuit for long. She was 13 years old when she saw Pete Seeger perform at a benefit concert, and she cites that as the moment that changed everything for her. When CBS Sunday Morning spoke with Baez in 2023, her answer to a question about participating in the civil rights movement was surprisingly sobering. She said, "I was smart then, and I was smart enough to know that 'we shall overcome' did not mean probably in this lifetime." Baez told The Hollywood Reporter that the 1960s and 70s were sort of a perfect storm of people taking risks to protest, and probably can't be recreated. When asked about whether a new generation of protest singers might be on the rise in the 2020s, she was a bit hesitant. In a 2023 interview with AARP, she spoke a little bit about the state of modern activism, saying that she was pretty shocked about where things had gone. "I didn't know that this country would be zooming toward fascism at this rate of speed. In some ways, it seems like we've come so far, and in other ways, we've gone backward or in the wrong direction."
You can't make real social change without somebody taking a risk.
When The Hollywood Reporter reviewed the documentary Joan Baez, I Am a Noise, they were shocked at how much new information the film shared. It turns out that there's a very good reason for that, and it's that directors Karen O'Connor, Miri Navasky, and Mabel Boyle were given unprecedented access to a vault of information that Baez herself had never even seen. Baez, who says that she trusted O'Connor partially because they had been friends for a long time, explained that the documentary had started out as an end-of-career wrap-up, but evolved. Baez said, "I opened up the storage unit. I'd never seen it myself, but it turns out my family kept every letter anybody ever wrote, every little tape I sent them from the road. It was all in there. I had no idea. It took a lot of trust to hand over letters and drawings, even recordings of therapy sessions and home movies." O'Connor told Variety that Baez had given them full access while not having the final say over what was or wasn't in the documentary, which was huge.
Once we cracked open the archive, we realized, the past will inform the present, and the present will be informed by the past.
Baez says it wasn't that hard. Once she made the decision, she knew that if she tried to go through it all, nothing would ever get accomplished. When she spoke with CBS Sunday Morning around the release of her documentary, Baez was heartbreakingly candid about her hazy memories of being sexually abused by her father as a child. She said the calmness she embraced while on stage was the exact opposite of what she actually felt, and that much of that inner turmoil was caused by something that both she and her sister came to remember as adults. She described it as a sexual inappropriateness that remained partially obscured by the shadows of time, memory, and trauma. Although her parents denied anything of the sort happened, Baez said, "Many parents who have been involved in this cycle and their kids accuse them, they don't remember. I wanted to remember. I couldn't until I was 50 years old, and they blocked it out." Baez went on to say that she felt it was a secret she needed to keep until the deaths of both her parents and her sister. She added that coming forward was a way to start the healing process. She told Variety that hearing recordings of her father's denial was one of the hardest parts of making the documentary. "Because I love my dad and I can't stand that part where he's talking on the tape recorder. Because his reality is what it was. I have no doubt that he was completely unaware of us remembering things." Campaigning for social justice is only part of Joan Baez's beliefs, and like her friend Martin Luther King Jr., she also championed nonviolent protest.
Nonviolent action was what I was born for. I knew that I belonged there.
In 2018, The Washington Post covered her appearance and concert in Charleston, South Carolina, where she spoke on the importance of the younger generation's continuation of their work. As part of the program, she shared the moment that nonviolent protest became so important to her. In 1956, King was speaking to a group of teenagers in Monterey. She recalled, "He started to talk and I started to cry. I just couldn't get hold of myself because he was doing what we were talking about." His work built on part of her own upbringing as a Quaker. In an interview with Traffic Beat Entertainment, Baez shared that her father had converted after finding meaning in Quaker meetings, and those teachings established her fundamental beliefs in pacifism. Then, when she was 10 years old, two things happened. She read Anne Frank's diary, and the family moved to Baghdad. She told The Telegraph that it was the first time she had seen people living in true poverty, and was something she carried with her for the rest of her life. The Guardian asked Baez what she thought were the best and worst things that came from her generation, and she pointed to Burning Man as an institution that gave what she thought were some of the most important lessons to be passed down. She said that she hadn't gone until around 2013, and that she'd waited so long because, at a glance, she thought that the whole self-sufficiency, living in the desert, no creature comforts thing just wasn't for her. But when she got there, she said she found an incredible community of people who relied on each other, helped each other, and shared what they had. It harkened back to the 1960s, she said, and explained, "In some ways, the hippie movement created a community for a lot of lost souls. I think our failures were outstripped by the good stuff. Nobody back then could have possibly written what scenario we're going through today." She cited the communal friendliness of Burning Man, Glastonbury, and Woodstock as being the best of the best. Meanwhile, she said she reveled in it. "I covered my head so nobody could see who it was and ran around with no clothes on, which worked well for me." Rolling Stone did an interview with Joan Baez that was a full 10 years old by the time it was published in 2019, and it was a fascinating look back at what it was like to be behind the scenes at Woodstock. Baez confirmed that it was just as wild backstage as the old footage suggests. She was pregnant at the time and there were drugs everywhere, even in the food. Baez says that she got to the stage from her hotel via a helicopter she shared with Janis Joplin, and yes, it was a wild ride. She recalled, "I remember flying over and it looked like ants with everyone heading over to one spot. I think we were the last or close to the last flight that got in before the rainstorm started up in a big way. It was pretty extraordinary." Baez says that she'd often asked Joplin if she wanted to get together sometime, but recalled that her offer wasn't exactly Joplin's thing. She explained, "I was such a dope. I'd say, I'd really like to spend time with you. Why don't you come over for a cup of tea?" She didn't know what a cup of tea was. She was standing there with a bottle in her hand. I was such a prude. Drugs and the 1960s went hand in hand, but Joan Baez had little interest in the drug culture of the time. In an interview with Rolling Stone, she said that although she did try some, cocaine once and a bit of opium, she was almost always the odd one out. It was particularly noticeable when she would tour with other musicians, and she explained, "I was the only one who didn't do drugs. I couldn't connect with what their brains were doing." Baez says that she believes that her dislike of drugs had something to do with her infamous split with Bob Dylan.
We went through the years and years and years afterwards, I did, being resentful.
But to her infinite credit, she stuck by what she knew was right for her, in spite of what everyone around her was doing. She spoke a little bit about her reversion to drug use in an interview with Mojo, explaining that it was something that she had always felt very strongly about. She said, "Back then, I believed in hell and thought it was wicked to have alcohol in the room. I wouldn't do drugs. I thought it was because I was so superior to everyone, but really, I was scared of losing control." Baez and Dylan's romantic relationship fizzled out in the mid-1960s, though he clearly remained on her mind. Her arguably biggest song, Diamonds and Rust, is about him, and they performed together a few times in the 70s and 80s, but they're not in contact now.
Do you have a relationship with him now? No.
Baez confirmed to Rolling Stone that even though she saw Dylan at an event in 2010, she didn't approach him, saying, The chances of him just walking past me would be too awful a scenario. It would just bring up feelings that aren't necessary. Baez says that she's worked long and hard to come to terms with the end of the relationship, and when she spoke with Variety around the release of the documentary I Am a Noise, she explained the rather beautiful way she moved on from the heartbreak. She said that she retreated to her art studio and painted his portrait, his music playing in the background. All of that resentment, all of that bull just drained away. It drained away. And I wrote him a letter and told him so. And I may never see him again, and that's okay too. Years after her romance with Bob Dylan ended, Baez dated a known Dylan superfan, Apple co-founder and longtime CEO Steve Jobs. In a biography, Jobs was quoted as saying he considered Dylan an all-time hero, and former partner Steve Wozniak said he obsessively collected Dylan bootlegs. Jobs and Baez started dating in the early 80s, and his friend Elizabeth Holmes seemingly confirmed that he, quote, loved that connection to Dylan. The relationship lasted for a few years, and if it seems like Baez and Jobs were an odd couple, she admitted that exact thing in an interview for Rolling Stone, saying, "We disagreed on almost everything, but he was sweet to me. He had a sort of boyish charm and was so alive with his discoveries. He just didn't understand people." They did keep in touch after they broke up, and she shared their final conversation in an interview with Mojo. I said, "How does it feel to have changed the world?" He said, "Okay." In 1972, Joan Baez joined a group of Americans visiting Hanoi, Vietnam for Christmas. The idea was to visit prisoners of war and hand-deliver letters, but things went very sideways very quickly. Peace talks faltered, bombing started, and over the next 12 days, an estimated 100,000 tons of bombs were dropped on the region. When Rolling Stone covered those 12 days through the eyes of Baez and her companions, the picture painted was horrifying.
Nobody was ready for it, including the Vietnamese.
Baez said that at first, they only saw Red Cross workers and destroyed buildings, but it wasn't long before she tried to comfort sobbing people who had lost everything. And she recalled seeing one woman picking up bricks, one at a time, and chanting. Baez said, "It was relentless. Both her young sons were buried under the bricks and there was no chance she would ever see them again." She spoke of seeing rescue workers carrying the dead and dying and of the smell of burning flesh. She revisited the bunker that protected her from the bombings in 2013. In an interview with The Guardian, the politically minded Baez shared the identity of the person she believed was the ideal leader, and it's not one that immediately springs to mind. Václav Havel was a writer who became president of Czechoslovakia and ushered the country through the end of communism. According to his 2011 obituary in the New York Times, he never stopped championing the cause of political freedom. Baez performed in Bratislava in 1989, not long before revolution ripped through the country. According to what Havel later told her, she played a part in causing it. In an interview with Traffic Beat, Baez said, "Havel said the last drop before it spilled over was my singing. You know, you're only a part of something that never feels like such a big change. But if that led into the Velvet Revolution and the guy says so, then that's something to be proud of." Joan Baez and her sister Mimi Farinha were both wildly talented singers, but Baez has admitted that she tried to talk her sister out of a career in music. She told Traffic Beat, "I told her that I didn't think she should be a singer because I was afraid she'd be in my shadow. She was a worthy singer, but I didn't want her to just be Joni's little sister." Farinha ultimately went on to found Bread and Roses, an organization that arranges performances for the elderly, the incarcerated, and patients in hospitals and other institutions. She was married to Richard Farinha, with whom she had a short-lived folk duo. The reason for the abrupt end of her music career had nothing to do with Baez, though. Mimi's husband was killed in a 1966 motorcycle accident that not only took place just a few days after he became a published novelist, but also on his young wife's birthday. Mimi died in 2001 after being diagnosed with lung cancer, and Baez spoke a bit about their relationship in an interview with The Telegraph, saying, "Towards the end, she gave me the gift of being so awful to me, almost to make it less hard." In 2023, Baez told AARP that the making of the I Am a Noise documentary confirmed her biggest regret in life, not spending as much time with her son Gabriel as she should have. She said, "I would say the hardest part has been dealing with my son's abandonment, basically. And I knew about it, but I didn't know it was that deep, you know? Some of that stuff is painful."
I mean, I was always surrounded by people looking out for me and taking care of me, but not with this closeness of a parent.
Baez had already been working on mending that relationship, though. When she spoke with The Guardian in 2014, she said she'd had a bombshell revelation that had allowed her to start healing. She had finally admitted to herself that she was terrified of close personal relationships, so she sank herself into activism that would allow her to become a voice for many instead. She said, "I was 50 when I decided I wasn't going to live like that anymore." Baez went to therapy with Gabriel to try to work through their issues. She added, "I need to respect the fact that he felt abandoned. The hardest thing is forgiving yourself, but it is necessary to do that." Joan Baez is a legendary musician, respected activist, and best-selling author, but she told AARP that none of that is what makes her most proud. That's much more personal and involves facing down anxiety and depression. She said, "If somebody asked what am I proudest of, I would say getting through that tunnel. It was pretty dark when I entered it, and I entered it on faith. And then by the end, I was really back in the light, or in the light in a way for the first time." She said that it came after a lot of hard work, dedication to therapy, and years of putting it off. It wasn't until 1990 that she decided she was so deeply unhappy that she needed to do something about it. What led to that in part was some very high-profile and very cruel treatment throughout the 1980s, when she became a punchline. Her activism became a joke, and she found herself unable to write or perform. Joan Baez may be retired from the stage, but not from making art. In 2020, she spoke with Rolling Stone about her new way of carrying on her activism, saying, "My painting is the best I can do at the moment to try and encourage people towards a possibly better world. I'm just really lucky to be able to do that." Baez started to paint portraits of people she respects, including personalities such as former Vice President Kamala Harris, the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Martin Luther King Jr., and Greta Thunberg. She shared that she felt fortunate to be able to have an art studio at her home where she could spend a few hours a day painting, before spending time with her many animals and still hoping to inspire sweeping change.
Well, who am I going to paint? Well, people I admire, and then it moved very quickly into the people who've changed my life.
While activism and change is a theme for her when it comes to choosing subjects for her portraits, she says there's something else important in there too, a willingness to take risks. She said, "I would always suggest that you be willing to take whatever the risk is to better the world for people who have less than you and who suffer and have no voice." As noted, Diamonds and Rust is probably Baez's best-known song. It's not hard to parse the lyrics and find that they're about Bob Dylan, the original vagabond. According to Baez, the song was inspired by an out-of-the-blue phone call she got from Dylan in 1974, nearly a decade after they'd parted ways. She recalled in an interview with the Huffington Post, "He read me the entire lyrics to Lily, Rosemary, and the Jack of Hearts that he'd just finished from a phone booth in the Midwest. Not only is Diamonds and Rust beloved by fans, but it's also one of Baez's personal favorites."
It turned out to be, sort of the most universal song I ever wrote.
Interestingly, the song also went on to become a favorite of metal fans thanks to a 1977 cover by Judas Priest. When the band's frontman Rob Halford encountered Baez at Live Aid in 1985, he was nervous that she'd react negatively, until she told him her son preferred the Judas Priest version to her own. In her 2023 documentary I Am a Noise, Baez reveals that she's had multiple personalities ever since childhood.
I identified as the multiple personality, MPD. I had many people emerge with their little stories.
She further explained to Parade of her dissociative identity disorder. "Mine was many splits, and each one had a reason for being there. Each little entity that's born is there for a reason when I was trying to grow up." Looking back, Baez could see that many of the issues she dealt with as an adult resulted from those voices inside her wanting to be heard. She said, "All of my phobias and weird behavior came from, in my opinion, them not being able to just come out, just state their case, and give me a chance to be whole." Joan Baez's repressed memories of childhood sexual abuse came about while undergoing intensive therapy as an adult. Over time, she moved away from traditional psychotherapy in favor of a unique variation of her own invention. As she explained in an interview with The Guardian, her spiritual beliefs over the years have veered toward Eastern philosophy and indigenous traditions. She said, "For me, the spirits are quite real. I talk to trees. I haven't had a therapist now in 20 years. I literally talk to the trees to get answers." She wasn't speaking metaphorically. Baez says she tends to take her advice from one particular tree. She observed that when seeking advice from people, they will often tell her what she wants to hear, not necessarily what she needs to hear. She said, "But these trees give it to you cold turkey." Along with consulting with them, Baez also enjoys spending her evenings in trees. She told the New York Times in 2023, "I sleep in my big oak tree most nights in the summer. I have a platform 20 feet up held in place by ropes and bamboo." She had originally accessed her treehouse bedroom with a ladder-style set of stairs that she admitted is now a bit too steep for a woman in her 80s. She said, "Having fallen from it once, I now use a climbing harness to get up and down, so my friends won't live in a constant state of panic and have to try and hide the panic from me." Her beloved oak also has a name, Frank, which she said the tree gave to himself. Baez's 2023 documentary features footage of her doing a pitch-perfect impression of her then-boyfriend Bob Dylan. She similarly mimicked him in the documentary No Direction Home.
Years from now, all these people are going to be writing about all the I write. I don't know where the comes from. I don't know what it's about, and they're going to write about what it's about.
Her Her impression was so accurate that during their time together, she would even take phone calls pretending to be him, with the person none the wiser. There's also a video shot in 1972 when Baez is bouncing her infant son on her knee while singing Dylan's "It Ain't Me, Babe," breaking into her impression at one point. However, as Dylan's voice grew deeper and more gravelly over the years, she did not keep up.
I used to do as his old voice.
Baez took her penchant for impersonation to the next level during Dylan's 1975 Rolling Thunder review by costuming herself as him. She pulled that stunt again in 1977 when she dressed as Dylan and then took the stage for the Bread and Roses Festival in Berkeley, reportedly causing momentary chaos when the audience briefly thought it was the real deal walking on stage. After Baez's retirement from touring, not only did she focus on painting, but she also published a book of poetry. Released in 2024, When You See My Mother, Ask Her to Dance compiled poems, diary entries, and various writings that serve as a memoir told through poetry. A press release for the book stated, "For the first time ever, her life is shared in verse, revealing pivotal life experiences that shaped an icon, offering a never-before-seen look into the reminiscences and musings of a great artist." Baez told the Poetry Society of America that she wrote the poems over a 7-year period, revealing that some of her various personalities contributed to the process. She said, "I say that some of them made the poems because I would look at the page and think, wow, who wrote that?" Baez found the process of writing poetry more different from songwriting than she expected. She said, "I thought, I got these great poems, I'm gonna make songs out of them, but it doesn't really work that way. I don't know why." Like most people, Joan Baez has a morning routine. Unlike most, though, hers involves dancing. She told the New York Times, "I dance in the morning when I get up, on and off through the day, and have a Zoom dance with friends one night a week." She did say that she had to tone it down a bit since turning 80. She explained, "We can start at 6 p.m. and quit at 7 instead of starting at 10 and dancing until I drop," which I realized was not that much fun after all, as I'm no longer 30 and everything began hurting. Dancing, in fact, has been a touchstone for Baez throughout her entire life. As she revealed in an interview with the Poetry Society of America, she enjoys some very specific music when she gets her groove on. "I go through a month-long period where I get up in the morning and just dance for 15 minutes, and it's always to the Gypsy Kings." Not everyone gets to see themselves portrayed by an actor on screen, but Baez did when Monica Barbaro played her early 1960s self in the 2024 Bob Dylan biopic A Complete Unknown. Baez saw the film and reached out to Barbaro, who received an Oscar nomination for the performance. Barbaro told Variety, "She left me a voicemail after she saw it and said lovely things. She extended a wonderful kindness to me. I'm hoping to meet her in person at a concert soon. I'm going to try and not sob in front of her." That hope became reality when Barbaro and Baez finally met face-to-face backstage after Baez performed at a concert. Barbaro told Deadline that witnessing Baez sing proved to be the icing on the cake. She said, "Getting to meet her was incredible, but to have also seen that was just life-changing, mind-blowing. I can't think of the proper words."
It was so nice to meet her in person, and yeah, she looks excellent. She
beautiful.
Sings
She's
beautifully.
Yeah.
The show that Monica Barbaro attended was a special tribute concert honoring Baez, held in San Francisco in February 2025. In addition to Baez, who briefly came out of retirement for it, Emmylou Harris, Roseanne Cash, Margot Price, Tom Morello, Joe Henry, Lucinda Williams, Taj Mahal, Bonnie Raitt, and Jackson Browne all took the stage. Joining Barbaro in the audience were Linda Ronstadt and hippie standard-bearer Wavy Gravy, who'd been master of ceremonies at Woodstock. Baez proved to be in fine voice when she made her musical contribution to the show, performing Diamonds and Rust. Not surprisingly, the evening was infused with the progressive political views which Baez had espoused for her entire life. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, she told the audience, "I just got a text from one of my friends saying this is the best rally I've been to in 65 years. Tonight, we're celebrating our strengths in this hall because music, joy, and laughter have suddenly become acts of resistance."